A, it's a good thing it's only 6 weeks. B, I had a little bit of a head start. Um, but we'll stop while we're ahead, right? Um, so let's just jump right in. I'm gonna hope that I even stick to my time limit. I Abigail was my favorite, hands down, to write about. I just fell in love with her as a person. So I'm just gonna hope that I can stick with, what do I have, 45 minutes? They'll be screaming in the nurseries if I go over. So I will. But we can look at all of the women that we've studied and just think, my goodness, these women were saints. Even if you look at the inside cover of our study, and it talked about these women were saints and were sinners. And it's easy to look at them and think, my goodness, they did such amazing, wonderful things, and God used them so powerfully. How is he going to do that through us? And really, things might look differently now. We certainly dress different. We have different traditions. Technology is different. Food is different. But people are still the same, right? They were real women. They had real families. They had real issues. And so are we. And if we really search the scriptures, like the pastor was talking about on Sunday, I think that's why their stories are there. And why God gives us certain little pieces of information which allow us to dig, which allow us to grasp things out of the scripture that probably weren't there just for historical accuracy, but were there so that our hearts can connect with these people, and so that our hearts can connect with him and why he did things for their good and for our good. So let's open up into 1 Samuel 25, and we're going to see just again what God did through Abigail, because really we're all ordinary until God's hand comes upon us, and that is certainly true through Abigail's story. Let's see. So 1 Samuel 25:3. My Bible is permanently marked in 1 Samuel 25 and in Judges 4. I'll probably always open up to those inevitably. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. And if you'll remember from the homework, I used the King James Version a lot because I loved it, especially in its description of Abigail in verse 3, which said she was a woman of good understanding and of a beautiful countenance. But just right from the get-go, we get this black and white picture of Nabal and Abigail's relationship. And we can see that whatever version you had, the descriptions of him were just pretty bad. We had wicked, evil, surly, churlish. I mean, surly and churlish, I don't even know where else I've heard those words to describe anybody. So you can get the picture as a pretty bad dude, somebody that nobody liked, certainly somebody that nobody respected, foolish, basically everything that you want to see that you don't want to see in a man, the boxes of things that would be on a list of what I don't want in a husband. So that's kind of why the idea of her having a beautiful countenance in spite of all that is even more intriguing. Let's turn to Romans 8:6 for a moment. We're going to flip back and forth between the two places a lot. Romans 8:6, which says the mind, I'll give you a minute. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. So Abigail and Nabal's marriage relationship kind of mirrors what any toxic relationship I can think of would. And most women, I'm going to assume, acting on feelings and emotions, would kind of view their position as his wife as just a life sentence to loneliness, to bitterness, to hopelessness, probably, to emptiness. You'd probably look at your life and think, before it, I knew who I was, and now I don't know who I am because I'm embarrassed of who I'm connected to. And, if you're emotionally disconnected to the person that you're economically tied to, it would be extremely hard to be stuck, and you'd probably feel pretty trapped. So not only, I think, did she not have respect for him, but she also had no trust in him to protect not only herself but her entire household, as we saw later. So we know that he had money. We know he had property. He certainly had good food, but none of that changed their relationship. So, it's evidence to me that her having a beautiful countenance was all in spite of that, and there had to be something behind that. My husband and I have been married for 8 years, and he's a good man. A lot of you know him, and he loves me like crazy. But I'd be lying if I said that there aren't days where sometimes I just think, oh my gosh, God, is this not going to get any easier? Because, we'll be in the middle of an argument, and as you can assume, I'm a very calm arguer. And I don't ever like to get my way. And I never have enough to say. If he was brought up one way and I was brought up another way, and I think this and he thinks that, and if we get caught in the little stuff, and it's hard just to even move past it and work through it, and if we have the same spiritual foundation and the same moral structure and the same values that we agree on, and we get stuck in that stuff, then I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for Abigail when they did not even have those. Because our evidence for that is that Nabal was siding with Saul. And Saul, remember, was acting in opposition to God's ways. And that's why God had to replace him. That's why God was raising up David to replace Saul in the first place. Abigail was siding with David, who had aligned himself with God, which tells us where their allegiances were. And so I'm pretty sure it was not easy to have dinner time conversation, because there probably wasn't a whole lot to talk about. At least it was on some common ground. So it's pretty safe to say that the environment around their home was anything but comfortable. In fact, it was probably most of the time pretty hostile. The natural behavior, I believe, of a woman in Abigail's shoes would probably have been to just kind of check out. I'm going to guess that if it were me and I were sentenced, married to a man like Nabal, I'd probably just rely on my 5 handmaids. Verse 42 says that she has 5 handmaids to deal with him. However, contact needed to be made with him for throughout the day, and then just kind of live out life as a shell of what I used to be before him, and just try to get through the rest of life, right? That would maybe be a natural response. But the mind governed by the flesh is death. Also, in verse 17, we can look at that. Verse 17, back in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 25. Verse 17, Samuel 25. When the servants came in running to Abigail, after they had been talking to, after they had overheard the argument between David's messengers and Nabal, they came running to Abigail and said, "Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." I think if most women were acting on natural behaviors or emotions, they would probably have just thought, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding? Like, this is the day I've been waiting for. I'll leave the doors unlocked so that you can come right in. Like, bring it on. I'll bring him out to you if you want. Like, I'll stand there and watch. I mean, shoot, this is great." And the other thing too is she may not have realized that David was only going to be had only been planning to take the men of the household. If she thought that disaster was hanging over the whole household, she could have thought that this was the end for her too. So she very likely thought this is going to be the end of all of us. But life with Nabal is not worth living anyway, so you know what? Take me too. It's just not worth it. I'm done. But Abigail didn't do that. She didn't. And we know that there was something behind that. And you know what? I think the reason is because God was her sovereign. And the rest of Romans 8:6 says the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. And that tells us a lot more about her. It was God that she aimed to please. So what did she do instead? She hurried to gather supplies. She jumped on a donkey. She hurried to intercept David. And sneaking out to do that, she was trying to preserve her household from ruin. She was helping David, and she was protecting him from sinning against God and from himself as God's future king. And that was certainly a part of it. But part of it was also a byproduct of what her primary aim was. And her primary aim was to protect her own household. And if you think about it, the fact that with a husband like Nabal, she was setting out to protect anything of his speaks volume of her character. Anything that was belonging to Nabal, anything that she had a part in, even if it came about by his own folly, she was protecting that which belonged to him. I think that just speaks hugely of her and the heart behind it. So I think the bottom line for her is that she put herself in a position to be used by developing godly character, by having developed godly character over time, such that when God determined to use a human being to reach a weary heart like David's, Abigail was just in the right place at the right time. So let's look more at her speech to David. We're going to jump down and look more at verse 27. I read over this countless times. It's underlined and highlighted in multiple colors. And I don't know about you guys, but her speech to him gave me goosebumps multiple times. And it was just interesting to watch the discourse change, because I gotta think at some point she must have stood up from her face down posture, right? Because a speech like hers does not happen completely from the ground.